Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, February 21st. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The spring game is in 54 days, the Notre Dame game in 194 days, the game against Michigan in 278 days. Late last week, ESPN's Bill Connolly released a list of the 60 greatest college football games of the 2000s, which included a handful of games involving the Buckeyes. So today we're going to be talking about some of those greatest games just involving the Buckeyes this century. And so this is going to be, instead of 60 games, some of which involve the Buckeyes, we're just going to do 30 games just involving the Buckeyes. So this is going to be a crossover episode, like those very special episodes of, ER or Grey's Anatomy or whatever, where they have people on from another show. We're going to kind of do a crossover thing here. We're going to do numbers 30 to 21 here, and you can hear numbers 20 through 1 on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Tony Gerdeman. He and I do the Buckeye Weekly podcast together as well. Didn't that work out well? So you'll hear us there too. Tony, thanks for being here.
Tom, as always, it is an honor and a privilege to be on the show with you. Thank you.
So we were kind of going back and forth on how we wanted to do this, and do we want to do it as a draft? Do we want to do it as, we come up with like a list? And you at the end kind of looked at it and went, why don't you just put a list together and I'll just nitpick it? And I said, yeah, that's fine. That sounds about right. Because, Bill Connolly putting his list together was like, this was impossible. And going through this list, I totally get it. Because I just went through year by year and just kind of went, okay, well, this game was close. This game was really consequential. This game was really dramatic finish. I'm like, well, okay, how many of these could there possibly be? And it was like there were 70. Like, for a team that beats Rutgers by 3 trillion points every year, it's like, how do they have this many close, dramatic games? But Jim Tressel coached at Ohio State this century, so there's some humdingers on there. The criteria I'm using here is exciting, dramatic finish, consequential, and, some of them are going to be not fit all 3 categories necessarily. I will give you a little spoiler alert. We're going to talk about the Holy Buckeye game a little later on one of the Buckeye Weekly shows. That was not a great game. That was really not a great game, but it ended up being pretty consequential and having a pretty dramatic finish. So we're going to be talking about it. So this is a very imprecise science. I'm sure you guys will have many disagreements. I'm sure Tony will have many disagreements, and he will air those here. So he can be the voice of the people here to tell me why I'm an idiot. We'll start with number 30. The 2009 season, the Oregon game in the Rose Bowl. And I feel like a lot of this is the context of what was happening around that time. Ohio State had just lost to Florida in the national championship game. Then they'd lost to LSU in the national championship game. Then they'd lost to Texas in the Fiesta Bowl. And all the narrative was that, Ohio State can't win the big one. The Big Ten can't win the big one. The Big Ten is losing all these bowl games. It was this huge drag on the conference's reputation, and this slow Big Ten, and just wait till the fast Chip Kelly offense, and then the Oregon Ducks are just going to run all over them. And then Tony, that was not what happened out in Pasadena that day.
No, first of all, Tom, your list is terrible, and I think you probably now feel like you shouldn't have tweeted at Bill Connolly saying your list is terrible, you're an idiot. Now you know what it feels like. This game, you're exactly right, because the narrative was out there, Ohio State, big, dumb, and slow. But I do remember one of the things that I think stuck with me and stuck with a lot of other people is, the run-up was just, gosh, how is Ohio State going to handle this Oregon offense? And I think even, was it the pregame interview where a sideline reporter, somebody asked Jim Tressel, how are you going to handle Oregon's up-tempo offense? And he said something to the effect of, we have an up-tempo defense. And they showed that in this game where they held Oregon to just 12 first downs, 81 yards passing, 260 total yards. And really, Oregon led for much of that game, but the Ohio State physicality, or actually, they didn't lead for hardly any of it. Ohio State kind of, it was close, but they were in control, line of scrimmage. Of course, you're not going to score a bunch of points as Jim Tressel's offense, but it certainly, it shut the narrative down quickly, and I think that, and it was the first time they won the Rose Bowl since the 96 season, so that was another big to-do as well.
Yeah, and you will never, ever, ever hear me cite time of possession on this podcast or any other podcast, except for this one time. Ohio State, 41 minutes and 37 seconds. Oregon, 18 minutes and 23 seconds. Like that was this. How do you keep a fast offense from scoring a million points? Have them stand on the sidelines. Then they're standing still and they're not going so fast. Yeah, Ohio State jumped out to a 10-0 lead. Oregon comes back, ties the game. Ohio State kicks a couple field goals. It's a 16-10 lead. Oregon scores a touchdown at the beginning of the third quarter, take a 17-16 lead, and there was just kind of this like, oh, here we go again feeling among Ohio State fans. And then they kick the field goal, take a 19-17 lead, and then right in the fourth quarter, 7 minutes left, 13 plays, 81 yards, 6:01 on the drive, and ends with a 17-yard touchdown pass from Terrell Pryor to DeVere Posey. That was kind of the dagger, and that was that was a game that was a little bit of a narrative shifter around the Ohio State program and the Big Ten program on the whole. The next one is the following year. It is the bowl game from the following year. If you check the official records, it never happened. But don't worry. I remember watching on TV. It did happen. Ohio State 31, Arkansas 26 in the Sugar Bowl. That was a number 6 Ohio State versus a number 8 Arkansas. This is very much the same. It's very much the same kind of story as the year before. The big, slow Ohio State, sure, okay, you beat Oregon, but you have never beaten an SEC team in a bowl game, and on and on and on. If you can imagine, that was a thing you heard on TV back in those days. Can you imagine what that must be like? I can't even imagine. Ohio State ended up with a 28-7 lead right before halftime. They had a 28-7 lead, and then Arkansas just was like slowly creeping back. They kick a field goal right before halftime. They kick a field goal early in the third. Ohio State kicks a field goal, and then Arkansas scores a touchdown right at the end of the third quarter, and it was 31-21, and every Ohio State fan was kind of going, oh boy, and then they get a safety, so it's 31-23, and then Arkansas kicks a field goal with 9 minutes left, and it's 31-26, and it was like, oh boy, oh man, and then Ohio State ended up winning. They won 31-26, and everyone lived happily ever after. That's what happened there, Tony, right?
Short term, yes. This was the game where all of the NCAA violators were allowed to play because something about they deserve it, or the fans deserve to see them, or whatever convoluted reason the NCAA had. But, Tom, the whole scoregami thing, like the first time a score ever happens in a game over the course of the history of the sport. I don't know that this is necessarily a scoregami, but the third and fourth quarters for Arkansas in this game, they score 11 points in the third quarter, 5 in the fourth quarter. I don't know. That may be a scoregami of a box score of some sort. And it was one of those things where, like you said, Ohio State led 28-7 at the half, and Jim Tressel's like, all right, now we probably just need one field goal, and we'll just coast from here. And that's exactly what they did, as everybody held on. But it was a fun first half because it showed Ohio State, fans, or showed the nation that Ohio State can play with the SEC. Now, unfortunately, it was just Arkansas, which Arkansas got a lot worse in terms of the national picture once Ohio State did that to them in the first half, because before that they were SEC West and they're legit. Then you see what happens, and you're like, well, clearly Arkansas didn't want to be there.
I mean, it's just a win over a Southwest Conference team, Tony. When you really look at it, does that really matter? And I am just noticing now that we have this like very smooth narrative arc, which I'm going to credit myself for intentionally doing this, which I definitely did not do. But so we just talked about a game where Ohio State really changed the narrative around the program, where Jim Tressel's team jumped out to a big halftime lead and then hung on for dear life in the second half. Tony, number 28, the 2001 Michigan game. Since I just told you what happened, I'll give you a few more specifics. Ohio State had not won in Ann Arbor since 1987, famously 2-10-1 under John Cooper 2 years earlier. I was sitting there in the top row of the stadium, and they introduced Ohio State's players, and everyone's getting booed, and then they introduced John Cooper, and there's a loud cheer, and it was like, oh boy, oh, okay, I think I see how this is going to go. And then it did. So the two years later, Jim Tressel's there, the famous 310 days speech, and then 310 days later, they come up there. Jonathan Wells scores a touchdown after a short drive after a Mike Doss interception. Then Jonathan Wells scores another touchdown on a 46-yard run on 4th and 1. Then Jonathan Wells scores another touchdown. And then Jermaine Gonzalez comes in to replace John Navarre. A snap goes over his head, rolls out the back of the end zone. It's 23-0 Ohio State at the halftime, and everyone's looking around like, what has happened? Have we walked through some kind of a weird dimensional portal or something? And then Michigan showed up, and and then it was 23-7, and then it was 23-13, and then Ohio State kicks a field goal to make it 26-13, and then Michigan scores another touchdown. It is 26-20, and again, Ohio State kind of hangs on for dear life. Dustin Fox picks off the pass. I mean, this was not a particularly consequential game in terms of Big Ten championship, or at least from Ohio State's perspective, or national championship. I mean, Michigan was 8-2 coming into that game. Ohio State was 8-3 coming into the game. Ohio State was 7-4. So it was just, this was a game that was much more of a narrative shifting game than it was a really consequential game, and it wasn't particularly exciting for much of it. But at the end, it got real exciting for just a little bit.
Yeah, and John Navarre throws 4 interceptions in that game. Ohio State had every reason to lose. The Steve Belisari incident, DUI right before that, and so they're starting Craig Krenzel in this game. And you are, I know Jim Tressel said that in 310 days, but you're starting your backup quarterback, so is that really going to, I guess we don't have to expect Ohio State to win. And then, boom, I think it really started to click with the Jonathan Wells 4th and 1, with the 46-yard touchdown run where it's like, well, 14-0 is legit. This is enough to really steer the ship of the rest of the game. And that's what Jim Tressel did. And then when it's 21-0, you're like, you get the turnover and you start to this could happen, cause back then you wanted to believe, but I don't know how many people actually did believe. Now, after watching Jim Tressel's introduction and then that halftime speech, you allowed yourself to believe, but then when the game gets here, you're like, but it turned. I don't know, Tom. Does it give this game too much credit to say it turned everything around? Because it feels like it turned everything around.
Well, it certainly changed the narrative around both programs, and then Ohio State finishes that season, and it was not a great season, and then they go to the Outback Bowl and fall way behind against South Carolina. They were on 28-0 against South Carolina, come all the way back, tie the game 28-28, and then they get the ball back, and then Steve Belisari throws an interception, and South Carolina runs it back and kicks a field goal at the end of the game. But you kind of had the narrative around the program shift a little bit, where it was all of a sudden, Ohio State's going to lose to Michigan every year, and that's doubly true in Ann Arbor, and all of a sudden that's not true. And then the year after that, they bring in that incredible recruiting class of Claret and Hawk and Carpenter and all those guys, all the guys who were kind of the core of the teams that sort of really changed the dynamic and the conversation around Ohio State football after that. So no, I think that's one that is, if you're going to mark days that were significant turning points in the history of Ohio State football, I don't know if that's quite as high on the list as the 1969 game where Bo and Woody start the 10-year war, but I think that's you look at the results of the series, and you look at the where Ohio State is sort of capping out as a team every year. I think it's hard to not look at that and go, that is a pretty significant shift in the narrative around Ohio State football for a long time. Next one, number 27. I will warn you now. These are not all going to be wins. Ohio State can lose good and exciting and dramatic games too. The 2000 Purdue game, that was, this was another one of these real shift in the sport. The Big Ten is no longer just pounding the ball in your face and running with 3 tight ends and a fullback and running between the tackles. This was Joe Tiller, Drew Brees. This was a game that was only 7-3 Purdue at halftime, and then it just exploded in the second half. It was an incredible game, very high stakes. This was one that really helped propel Purdue to the Rose Bowl. Ohio State down 10-3, middle of the third quarter, kicks a field goal, scores a touchdown. Nate Clemens runs back a punt for a 20-10 lead after 3 quarters. It's okay, they got it. And then here comes Drew Brees, touchdown to John Standiford, touchdown to Vinny Sutherland. Jerry Westbrooks comes back, scores a touchdown with 2 minutes left to tie the game, and then Purdue gets the ball back. And Tony, do you remember who caught the pass?
Yeah, Seth Morales. Everybody,
Seth
I
Morales.
Think most
yes.
people that's a name that will live in infamy for a lot of Ohio State people. He's the one. And amazingly, Drew Brees threw 4 interceptions in this game, including one in the fourth quarter where he also threw 3 touchdowns. Mike Doss had 2 picks in this game, and then the ball is Doss is the one who got thrown over for the winning touchdown. So I know a lot of people still remember like, oh, Doss gave up that touchdown, but he also had like 2 interceptions. And I could scroll down here and look how many tackles he had in that game as well. He finished with 11 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. But people remember the streaking Seth Morales, and that one, it's Tom. I disagree wholeheartedly with you putting losses on this. I don't think losses are entertaining in any way, but this was it was a fun one, and it was because it had the highs and lows. It had the point where you were confident, like, oh, okay, Ohio State, this is what they do. They win in the fourth quarter, and then Drew Brees was like, not always. And I don't have his exact fourth quarter stats, but they had like 3 long drives in that fourth quarter, so it wouldn't surprise me if Brees threw for like 160 yards in the fourth quarter alone.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the mood swings of that game with about 3.5 minutes left. Mike Doss intercepts Drew Brees. Ohio State's down 24-20. They're trying to seal, Purdue's trying to seal the game. Doss intercepts Drew Brees, runs it back to the 2. That sets up that Jerry Westbrook's go-ahead touchdown. And it's like, okay, so in the span of, just a minute, you've gone from, okay, you're down, you're losing, Purdue has the ball, and now Ohio State has the lead, and Mike Doss is the hero. And then 2 plays later, the ball goes over Mike Doss's head to Seth Morales, and it's like, oh boy, that's football is not always kind to the people that play it. Another game where the Ohio State football team had some people running past some safeties. The 2018 Maryland game. You and I were there for that one. Not the most consequential game. I mean, it ended up, that Ohio State won the Big Ten that year, so it was kind of played a role into that. But a double overtime game, one of the weirdest games I can ever remember covering. Ohio State gave up 535 yards in the game. They Anthony McFarland, the running back for Maryland, finished just shy of 300 yards rushing, 21 carries for 298 yards, averaged 14.2 yards per carry. A couple long touchdowns early in that game. I mean, that was one where I just remember sitting in the press box and going, what is going on? How is this what Ohio State is doing today? What is going on?
Yeah, that was one where, I mean, Ohio State 94 total plays on offense for 688 yards. Damon Arnett kind of had some issues with keeping contain on those long runs. And there was just a lot of like, is this really happening? It was 17-3 after the first quarter with Maryland leading. And it was then 24-17 Maryland at the half. And Ohio State needed 21 fourth quarter points just to be in a position. And they actually take the lead. And then this was a really entertaining game. And it was still one that was like, you're looking at next to the people next to you and you're like, nobody expected this, but it's happening. And then you're just looking for confirmation that this is happening, right? And then, you're down on the field for the end of it and you see just how close Maryland, you got a picture of it, I believe, of just how close Maryland came to winning this. And when I say, fingertip, I might be exaggerating it. Like it was that should have been a loss for Ohio State. It wasn't just because of Ohio State, I think, superior skill, like J.K. Dobbins rushing for 200 yards, Dwayne Haskins throwing for over 400, and you just got playmakers like Terry McLaurin and Johnny Dixon who could keep things alive. But man, that Ohio State got away with one on that one.
Oh, no question. Yeah, down 17-3, and it was just 50 seconds into the game, they give up an 81-yard touchdown. And 6 minutes into the game, they give up a 75-yard touchdown run. Like, it was like, what? And then, back comes Ohio State, 68-yard touchdown. Then Maryland had a 37-yard interception return. And then Ohio State ties it to start the fourth quarter. Maryland comes right back down, answers with a touchdown. Ohio State comes right back down, answers with a touchdown. Maryland answers with a touchdown. Maryland recovered a fumble for the go-ahead touchdown with 1:41 left. Ohio State goes right down the field, 7 plays, 50 yards, and Ben Victor scores the tying touchdown. And then 3 rushing touchdowns from Dwayne Haskins. Don't let anyone ever tell you that Dwayne Haskins never ran the ball. Dwayne Haskins ran the ball a bunch in that game, and they just barely won it. Next up, 25, the 2003 Purdue game. This is one that I think maybe gets a little overshadowed because they were, this was the week before, I believe, the Michigan game, and Ohio State ended up losing that Michigan game, so this didn't end up contributing to another national championship run. But this was, one of these Jim Tressel classics where it wasn't a good game, but man, was it a close and a very exciting game.
Tom, it was not a good game. Ohio State, no offensive scores. You look through the box score, and they had a touchdown or a scoring drive of 2 yards in the second quarter, a scoring drive of a fumble recovery in the end zone for a touchdown. Their longest scoring drive was 79 yards, ended in a field goal in the second quarter. But even their game-winning field goal was a 6-yard drive. Like, this should not be on any list about anything being great. 15 first downs for Ohio State. I saw this on a list. I'm like, what am I not remembering? And then I look at it, I'm like, I am not remembering this because I've blocked it from my memory. Like, this is my brain doing myself a favor here. Like, I didn't remember this game. And then I looked and I'm like, now I know why. There's no point. Why would I want to remember this?
You know what? There's a lot that doesn't show up on that box score that makes this a little more. I mean, this was a really dramatic game where you had
Purdue was 5-1 coming into this in Big Ten play. They were 8-2 overall. So this was obviously a very big Big Ten. It was number 10 versus number 4.
Yes,
so,
it was. Yeah,
so
it was a high stakes game, and you got to the end of the game, and Ohio State has tied the game at 13-all. Purdue has the ball. They're driving to try and score with the in the final minute. They're trying to, final 2 minutes. They're driving to try and kick a game-winning field goal. They fumble. Ohio State's Tim Anderson picks it up at the Purdue 29. Ohio State gets the ball back. It's like, all right, they have Mike Nugent, Tony. What could possibly go wrong? And Purdue blocks the game-winning field goal at the gun. So then you go to overtime, and Nugent kicks a field goal in the top half of the first overtime, and then you get Purdue's Ben Jones lining up to try and kick a field goal, and this is the one that Jim Davidson, the Ozone photographer, has the great picture of Dustin Fox just getting his fingertip on the ball and tipping the ball wide. Ohio State wins 16-13. It was one of those. This was one of those you had to be there kind of games because it was so tense in the stadium that you look back and it's like, oh man, it's like how people will include the Alabama LSU 9-6 game in the greatest games, and it's like, well, that was really kind of a crap fest. It's like, yes, but man, it was real intense in that stadium. I think that, again, like I said, I think that was the week before the Michigan game. So here's another one that was pretty intense in the stadium. 2011 Wisconsin. Not a lot on the line for Ohio State that year. That was one that I was there. I was just up in C-Deck. I just had gotten seats. It was like, well, I might as well go to a game. I mean, they're not very good this year, but whatever. And there was no real expectation for Ohio State that night. The season was kind of drifting off at that point already. Wisconsin was real good that year. That was the Russell Wilson year for Wisconsin. Ohio State had a true freshman quarterback in Braxton Miller who had kind of taken over for Joe Bauserman at that point. And it was like, well, this is kind of a lost season, but just sort of see what you got. And then you have the true freshman quarterback going against this guy who's going to be an NFL superstar in just, the next year. And it was one of the most dramatic finishes in Ohio Stadium history, I think.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I was on the field for that one down on the sideline. I was on the opposite sideline of the eventual game winner to Devin Smith, unfortunately. So you're watching it at catty corner as it's happening, and it's still quite impressive to experience there in person. But this is one where Ohio State looked really good and had a 2-touchdown lead, 26-14 in the fourth, and then it was the Jared Aberdare show where Russell Wilson showed everybody what he could do, and they actually got the lead back with like 1:18 to play, and that's when Braxton Smith had to do what he did. But Ohio State rushed for 268 yards in that game, 58 rushes to 12 passes to remind everybody what it used to be like, and 12 passes is probably on the high side for Braxton Miller that year, so they were just slinging it all over the place. And then that final one, 40 yards touchdown for Devin Smith, his only catch of the game. And I don't know where that was in terms of which number of touchdowns that was for Devin Smith. As we know, he retired as a Buckeye, being Ohio State was undefeated anytime he caught a touchdown pass. I don't know if that was his first, probably not, because that was the like the 7th or 8th game of the year or so. But yeah, just a crazy ending, a huge buildup, and then it was like, because we had seen games that year where I think it's maybe the Penn State game where it's just like you shouldn't have lost. This was a game that they shouldn't have lost at home, just like Penn State, and you lose it, you lose the lead, and you're like, well, I guess that's, you can't expect Braxton Miller to go and do what he did, but then he did, and this was, I think you'll have people having this higher on their own lists than your list, Tom.
And, just purely in terms of the excitement and the drama of the game, I could totally see that. This just, in the big picture, this didn't really matter that much. It was the difference between going to the Gator Bowl and not going to the Gator Bowl, which, some could argue they'd be better off the other way, but that's neither here nor there.
Boy, oh boy. Tom, if that never happens, then Ohio State is playing Notre Dame for the national championship in 2012.
Well, I didn't want to see. Now you're upsetting the people. I'm just trying to hint around things.
The worst play in Ohio State history: Braxton Miller to Devin Smith.
And one thing that I think gets lost, people remember that, and it's like, and then they walked off the field, and everything was great. It was like, no. They had to kick the ball off because Wisconsin had 20 seconds left, and Drew Basil kicks the ball out of bounds, so Wisconsin gets it on the 40, and after a couple incomplete passes. They call Ohio State for a 15-yard face mask penalty. So Wisconsin gets an untimed down from the Ohio State 45 with Russell Wilson as their quarterback, trying to pull off what would have been a miraculous win and a very on-brand loss for that year's Ohio State team. But he didn't do it, and Ohio State won by the skin of their teeth. It was that was one of the more memorable games. Like, there were games that I put on the kind of the broader list, and I'm like, I don't really remember this game. There were a lot of Tony, I don't mean to spoil the surprise, but there are a lot of very interchangeable overtime or one-possession games between Ohio State and Wisconsin that I'm like, I don't remember which one of this is. It's like they're all, every Ohio State-Wisconsin game except for maybe one is pretty much the same. So that one really stood out. Number 23, here's another one that stood out, 2018 Michigan game, and I'm sure, again, people will have this higher on their list, but this was not a close, dramatic game. This was a statement game. This was a another kind of swing in the rivalry game where you had Ohio State going against Michigan on Michigan's big revenge tour, and Michigan came in number 4 in the country, and came in with 10-1, 8-0 in the conference, and all set to make a run to the college football playoff. And then the game started, and Tony, how'd that go for them?
Well, this one was interesting because Ohio State went up 21-6, and it was like, this is amazing. And that was like late in the second quarter, and then Michigan scores like 2 quick touchdowns, and there's is that the DeMario McCall?
Yes.
Yeah, that fiasco. Yep. And so now it's 21-19 at the half, and you're like, well, this game was over 5 minutes ago, and now it's just been restarted. And for me, this is just an example of Ohio State continuing to prove themselves against Michigan. Like, I said, stay down. And then Michigan would come back up and be like, no, you go up by like 3 touchdowns, and Michigan would try to cut it to 2 or whatever. And you go, no. And you had that throughout the entire second half. Ohio State outscored Michigan 38-20 in the second half, but 20 of those points came all in the fourth quarter for Michigan. Like, it just allowed Ohio State to continue to pile points on. So it feels like I don't know that Ryan Day or Urban Meyer really minded the fact that Michigan kept scoring, because it's like, well, this justifies what we continue to do. And so it's like, well, if you're going to keep fighting, we're going to have to keep stabbing. And so that's what Ohio State did.
Yeah, that was, you mentioned the 2 scores right before halftime. That was 6 seconds apart. They scored 2 touchdowns to take it from 21-6 to 21-19. And Ohio State goes right down the field before halftime, 7 plays, 74 yards in just 41 seconds, kicks a field goal from the 19-yard line. I'm sure I handled that well in real time. That was right at the gun. And then to start the third quarter, they have a drive where they go down and kick another 19-yard field goal to make it 27-19. But then the game really swung on that block punt that Chris Olave comes right up the gut, blocks the punt. Seven Banks picks it up, scoops it up, and scores. Mike Weber, as he is contractually obligated to do, scores a touchdown against Michigan to make it 41-19, and then they just kind of traded touchdowns for the rest of the game, ended up 62-39. But and then with after the game with Urban Meyer and Shelley in tears on the field, that was a memorable one. Another couple from the 2012 season, and I think you can make an argument that I have these too high, but these preserved and undefeated season. I'm just going to lump these two together because they were two games against teams from the same state that ended in very dramatic ways, but very different kinds of games. The 2012 Indiana game, which was just like, do you like touchdowns? Great. Smoke the whole pack. And then the 2012 Purdue game, which was, maybe the most dramatic ending of a game that you saw in that first Urban Meyer season. Which one of those was more memorable to you? Was it I feel like it must be the Purdue game just because of the incredible way that ended.
Yeah, Tom. Anytime we've talked about greatest stadium experiences we've ever had, I always have that 2012 Purdue game in my mind because I was down in the corner where Ohio State's 2-point conversion was, where their game-winning touchdown was. So like that's etched into my brain more than the 2012 game against Indiana, which was, like you said, a score fest, 52-49, with 5 touchdowns scored in the fourth quarter. And it's just that kind of craziness. I don't know. And Indiana doesn't really stick with me. Like because I even had to look, I'm like, that wasn't the Xander Diamont years, because that was later on. It's like the Indiana games, like the Wisconsin games run together for you, the Indiana games run together for me, and none of them really stand out. Even the one, 2017 or 2018 when Ohio State, 2017 when they opened there and whoever threw for 400, 500 yards against Ohio State. Like all of these high-scoring Indiana contests, just they're all kind of the same to me.
Yeah, I'm just going to run down the touchdowns scored in that game for in that Indiana game. 12-yard run for Corey Brown, 59-yard run for Indiana, 7-yard run for Indiana, blocked punt for a touchdown for Bradley Roby, 60-yard touchdown reception for Devin Smith, 67-yard touchdown run for Braxton Miller, 76-yard touchdown pass for Indiana, 14-yard touchdown pass for Carlos Hyde, 1-yard touchdown run, boring, 1-yard touchdown run, boring, 46-yard touchdown pass to Devin Smith, 12-yard touchdown pass for Indiana, and then a 25-yard touchdown pass for Indiana. It was like, man, if you like offense, man, oh man. It was, and this was a game that was Ohio State kind of, it was one where you felt like Ohio State had this in control. It was 52-34 with 5 minutes left. It was 52-34 with 2 minutes left. Mm-hmm. And then the Indiana scores, and then they get the ball back, and they score another touchdown 35 seconds later. And it was like, how is this a game? How is this thing was over? You were dead. How are you still alive? So yeah, that was another one that was, maybe not as, it ended up being consequential because they finished undefeated. If they hadn't finished undefeated, does that maybe get lift off the list? Yeah, maybe. But yeah, it was that was another one that you remember, like, man, it was not a game where it was not a comfortable viewing experience for Ohio State fans. How about that? That was, they ended up winning, but it was like, I think I remember Urban Meyer after that game just basically saying, like, that was really stupid. I can't believe we did that. Like, how did you? It was that 2012 team was not without its flaws. Let's put it that way. But they kept winning, and a couple dramatic wins to do that. So we have gone a million miles longer than a typical morning scoop show, which is why we are breaking this into several pieces, and we're going to continue the conversation on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. So if you want to hear the rest of it, here are numbers 20 to 1. There are going to be a couple losses in there, but there are going to be some pretty good games in there too. Some pretty significant wins for Ohio State history. You can hear that on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. So go ahead and subscribe to the Buckeye Weekly show wherever you're getting this podcast. And then while you're there, go ahead and you can find it by searching Buckeye Scoop. And while you're there, subscribe to all of our other great shows. We've got the Big Me Kickoff. We've got Around the Oval. We've got Gives in the Bank. They're all there. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to find that those Buckeye Weekly shows here as well. Just hit that bell. That'll get you notified every time we post a new show. So as soon as those pop up, you'll be able to watch them. YouTube.com/Buckeye Scoop. And if you enjoyed this show, hit that thumbs up button. That will help other folks find these as well. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.